To catch up. A little more clicking because it's going to be strange for me today. Some days works fine. Some days it needs extra pushing. What are you going to do? It's just the way of the world, it seems. If technology were reliable, well, then we wouldn't have many millions of people who were gainfully employed. All right, 12:01. We have hit our official start time, and we do have a fairly lengthy bit of commentary to get through. There's a couple of commentaries in particular that were a little bit longer. They cover a lot of material, but we do need to work through the details. So that means I've gone past my 2-page normal version. We're up to 2.5, but I think we'll still make it if we start on time. So let's go ahead and begin here in Genesis 26, verse 11. We are jumping into the story because it's the only way to squeeze it all in. And here we are in Parashat Toldot. And this is the story of Isaac. Well, mostly, but also mostly his kids. And, well, there's a lot going on. But here we are focused on a vignette which should look very, very familiar because it is the same sort of circumstance that happened to Abraham and Sarah. Isaac and Rivka had to go down into the area of the Philistines. That's down along the southern coast of the Eastern Mediterranean in the modern area of Gaza and that range. And they had to stay with Avimelech. We went through the whole "she's my sister" story again. And then eventually that was discovered. And that's where we're picking up here, where Avimelech, which is the name of the king, is the one responding. Just as a quick aside, Avimelech is almost certainly a title, much like Pharaoh is a title in Egypt. Avimelech literally just means my father is the king, or my father the king. It's sort of a compound version of Avinu Malkeinu, perhaps. Which would have been a Hebrew translation of whatever that culture's language might have been. So this is probably not the same Abimelech that was there when Abraham was alive, although it might be. We don't know for sure because, as I said, it's probably a title, and that means without the additional indicator, we can't be sure exactly who this was. So they've stayed. They have revealed that this is actually a husband and wife team, not brother and sister, and Avimelech is trying to overcome the danger from having almost committed adultery with another person's wife. And Avimelech commanded the entire people, saying, "Whoever touches this man or his wife must be put to death. Yes, death." So very, very strong royal decree of protection on Isaac and Rivka. And then we get to Isaac living. Yitzchak sowed in that land and reaped in that year 100 measures. Thus did Adonai bless him. So it is going great for him agriculturally there in the land. The man became great in wealth and went on becoming greater until he was exceedingly great. So not only does he have a good first year, he continues to thrive in this land. He had herds of sheep and herds of oxen and a large retinue of servants, and the Philistines envied him. All right, so this is where things get a little dicey again. Remember, we began the story with Isaac and Rivka coming down under presumably false pretenses. And now they are doing very well, having reconciled with Avimelech and the locals. But now things are beginning to look, well, ugly again. But here it seems to be not because of any misleading issues, but because of Isaac and Rivka's great prosperity. And all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines stopped up and filled with earth. So not only are they jealous, but they are acting on their jealousy. They are deliberately damaging the wells that Abraham had dug the ones that we had, well, not we this year, but that we have talked before in the Torah about the original covenant being made between Abraham and Avimelech when there was tension between their people as well. Now, at this point, verse 16, Avimelech said to Yitzchak, "Go away from us, for you have become exceedingly mightier in number than we." So the king is telling Isaac and his group to leave, that they have become too prosperous. Now, this is, of course, echoing the same kind of conversation that happened with Lot, where there was rivalry between Lot's people and Abraham's people, and Abraham there, of course, graciously allowed Lot to choose what he wanted to do to solve the situation. Here, Avimelech is much less gracious. He is expelling Isaac and his group from their territory. Notice this also echoes the actions of Pharaoh, where they also complain that the people have become too numerous, too mighty, and they are worried about that. Of course, Egypt has a different solution, which is the enslavement of the people of Israel. So 3 different versions of how to handle this sort of rivalry and competition: the graciousness of Abraham, the separation here of Avimelech, and the enslavement that happens in Egypt. Verse 17. So Yitzchak went from there. He camped in the Wadi of Gerar and settled there. So he moves further out of the main area. Yitzchak again dug up the wells of water which had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines having stopped them up after Abraham's death. And he called them by the same names by which his father had called them. So he is trying to reclaim the land that his father had claimed earlier and which the Philistines had stopped. Yitzchak's servants also dug in the wadi and found there a well of living water. Now the shepherds of Gerar quarreled with the shepherds of Yitzchak, saying, "The water is ours." So he called the name of the well Esek, or bickering, because they had bickered with him. They dug another well and quarreled also over it. So he called its name Sipnah, or animosity. He moved on from there and dug another well, but they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehovot, or space. And he said, "Indeed, now Adonai has made space for us so that we may bear fruit in the land." So we see in this cycle of well digging that Isaac is being very conciliatory. When the locals are complaining that those waters don't belong to him, he has moved further and further out until they stop complaining, and at that point he feels satisfied. Although we see in verse 23 that nonetheless he goes from there to Beersheba. Now, like I said, the area of the Philistines is near the coast in what is modern-day territory called Gaza. Beersheba is much, much further inland, almost in the center of the broad stretch of the modern boundaries of Israel. So this is not a next door move. This is a considerable move. Now, Adonai was seen by him on that night and said, "I am the God of Abraham your father. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and make your seed many for the sake of Abraham my servant." He built an altar there and called out the name of Adonai. He spread his tent there, and Yitzchak's servants excavated a well there. So they moved to Beersheba. God says, "Don't worry, even though you were probably feeling a bit alarmed or even distressed, having been driven out of that area near Avimelech, having lost well after well because you were unwilling or felt unable to engage in confrontation. Nonetheless, I, says God, will stand by you. You will still succeed, and you, of course, will have a long progeny that will stretch out from you." So this reassurance is almost certainly aimed at what Isaac had just overcome, but it may also be aimed at what is about to come, because in verse 26, after we've reached this point of moving to Beersheba, of drilling a whole new well, of having left behind all of that trouble, jealousy, and strife, here comes Avimelech again. So it's rather surprising in verse 26 that now we are going to fight this same argument one more time, relitigate it, if you will. So let's pick up at verse 26. which is sort of the thrust of our discussion here. Now, Avimelech went to him, meaning to Isaac, from Gerar, along with Ahuzat, his aide, and Pihol, the commander of his armed forces. All right, so here comes Avimelech, and he's got with him essentially the vizier, one of the major representatives of the civil administration of the people, and of course Pihol is the representative of the armed forces, which means they probably are not just three people, but are probably a large contingent coming here from Gerar. Yitzchak said to them, "For what reason have you come to me? For you hate me and have sent me away from you." So notice, Isaac didn't complain. Isaac didn't argue. He didn't confront Avimelech with the mistreatment that he had when he was living in Gerar. He just eventually kept leaving and leaving and leaving until it was a distant memory. And now when Avimelech comes to him, Isaac is finally speaking up in a very strong voice. What? I'm not far enough from you? Seems to be the feeling of this. You remember, you sent me away. You told me to leave. You hated me. You were jealous of me. Why are you coming to me now? What have I done that could possibly make you come to me now? You have no say over Beersheba. There's no way that we can possibly reconcile. What's the problem? That seems to be the tone of Isaac. Now, our commentary is going to try and recast this, but for the moment, as the Peshat, it seems to be that Isaac is outraged by their arrival. So what does Avimelech say? They said, "We have seen that Adonai has been with you. So we say, pray, let there be an oath curse," meaning a vow, a covenant between us and you. We want to cut a covenant with you. If ever you should deal badly with us, ... The ellipse in Hebrew oaths always means something terrible would happen to you if you violate this. Just as we have not harmed you, just as we have only dealt with you and have sent you away in peace, you are now blessed by Adonai. He made them a drink fest. They had the proper feast, and they ate and they drank. Early in the morning, they swore an oath to one another. Then Yitzchak sent them off, and they went from him in peace. Okay, let me get more well findings and so on for the rest. Now, what's going on here? What is this meeting between Avimelech and Yitzchak? Why is Avimelech showing up? What are they trying to achieve? Are they creating a new covenant? Is this a continuation of the covenant that Abraham made? Has there been some action that has jeopardized the prior covenant? What's going on here? And what do they mean that they have seen that Adonai has been with you? Perhaps Avimelech is coming because with Isaac now so far removed, he's recognized that the blessing that Isaac received was not anything that was taken from the people of Avimelech's kingdom, but was a blessing given by Adonai to Isaac, no matter where Isaac would be. It wasn't that Isaac was getting rich at the expense of Avimelech and his nation. It was that Isaac was getting rich because God supported him regardless of where he was. And now, of course, with Isaac having been removed, his prosperity is not diminishing. He is not wasting away because he has lost access to the rich lands of Gerar and the Philistines. He seems to be doing very well. And this might be raising some alarm bells in Avimelech. Avimelech may be thinking, we sent this guy away because he was growing too prosperous, but his prosperity continues. And if he was a danger before when he was among us, will he not be a danger of even larger proportions now that he is removed from us? Maybe he left with some hurt feelings. Maybe he is going to come back and retaliate. Maybe now that he is growing in prosperity and strength, things will turn to war. It could very well be on a Peshat level that is what's happening here, is that Avimelech is concerned that the breach of their relationship when Yitzchak left will be the prelude to a conflict with Yitzchak as a growing rival in the region. And Avimelech wants to reaffirm the agreement between him and Isaac as the agreement between Avimelech or his predecessor and Avraham. So that's a Peshat way of looking at this as a sort of realpolitik, power politics kind of negotiation, where one nation is concerned at the growing power of another nation and are seeking to form a peace treaty before it can turn into open hostilities. All right, so that's one way of looking at it. I'm going to pause while I take a quick drink of tea, but also give chance for questions. Let me just check our YouTube feed, make sure there's nothing coming in there. All right. Now, that is one way to look at that. And, certainly in the light of the current events taking place in Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel, the current state of war that is being carried out, it is natural to think in strategic, tactical, national interest sort of terms. And as I say, that is a perfectly legitimate Peshat reading of this episode, that Avimelech is coming as a petitioner, and he is trying to placate Isaac, and he is coming with a sign of honor, but also of strength, to ensure that there will be a mutual non-hostility agreement between the two groups. And that way, Avimelech will feel secure, and now, recognizing the strength of Isaac, he too, Isaac, will also be able to feel safe and no longer feel chased by the people of Avimelech, who seem to be living off of the successes of Isaac in a way that obviously Isaac might be annoyed at. And while Isaac was a bit weaker, Avimelech may have been willing to accept that his people were treating Isaac this way. Now that he sees Isaac's strength, he is trying to negotiate for no hostilities. That indeed is a perfectly fine way of looking at it. But we can also look at it in a more personal matter, between Avimelech and Yitzchak, not as representatives of clans and city-states and tribal affiliations, but as individuals who have a tense relationship between them, and they are seeking to navigate them. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into our text here. The majority of what we're doing today is from Or HaChaim, because I felt that he not only summarized other commentaries well, but sewed together a number of the underlying topics in a way that is, I think, very helpful for those of us today. So let's begin with the first question. And Avimelech went to him from Gerar. Why did the Torah have to tell us where Avimelech came from? We know he lived in Gerar. So classic midrashic opening, which is often not said explicitly, but that there is a problem. There is an issue in the text. And here the issue is the superfluous term from Gerar. All it needed to say was an Avimelech went to Isaac. It did not need to tell us where he came from. So how do we answer that? Well, aware of this difficulty, Bereshit Rabbah, the great midrashic collection, mentions that the word from Gerar is to be understood here as the king having experienced strange growths on his body, which he attributed to his treatment of Isaac. So here from Gerar is being used in a play on words. That the word Gerar is very similar to gorer in the Hebrew, which could be some kind of bodily affliction that happened because Avimelech had taken Rivka, although he didn't know that that was actually Isaac's wife, and all of those sorts of issues. But as Or HaChaim says, of course, this is a homiletical explanation only. This is Agadah, meaning that this is not necessarily what actually happened, but that this was a teaching in Bereshit Rabbah to try and give us some moral or ethical insight, but not necessarily the historical insight to the events. Now, it's unusual for some commentators to explicitly point this out, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this commentary, because oftentimes commentaries will simply ignore the Agadic, the homiletic explanations that they are not interested in. But here, Or Chaim feels that he has to mention it because it is a very famous explanation of the superfluous from Gerar, and he is going to explain it and dismiss it as being homiletical, and then explain why he believes that even if we were not going to take it homiletically, that there is a fundamental inadequacy of that explanation. Besides, why did he have to take his general Pichol and Ahuzah along? If these people were merely part of the royal entourage, the Torah did not have to bother mentioning it. So he's pointing out that if this was just him coming because of the illness that he had an affliction to, there would be no need for him to mention the general and the other representative by name. And if you're going to say that, well, of course, those people were there with him because that's what a royal entourage is like, well, exactly. And we don't hear the list of everybody in the royal entourage in the usual conversations. So we don't get an entire roster of everybody in the list, everybody in the room. So the fact that they are mentioned and the fact that they are there at all is indicating that this is more than just a issue of the body that was mentioned in the Midrash. So with that in mind, we're going to turn to explanation number 2. The intent of the Torah is to explain why Avimelech suddenly needed Isaac as an ally and flattered him, though he should have been secure in the knowledge of the covenant Abraham had made with him. All right, so he's saying the section that's happening here, we need to understand it, and we will interpret its different pieces and phrases in the idea that this is Avimelech trying to get something from Isaac, and that something is going to be a reassurance of some way, shape, or form of the covenant with Abraham. But because that covenant already pre-existed, we also have to then explain why he might have thought that the covenant would be abrogated. So let me see if I can put that into better English. Avimelech seems to be coming because he needs Isaac, but the need should be covered by the covenant that was already made by Abraham. But the fact that Avimelech shows up shows that there is some doubt about that covenant, or its applicability, or its ratification, or something, and that then needs to be explained by the various behaviors of Avimelech and the group that's with him, Isaac's response, and all of the context. So let's carry on. So the validity of that covenant extended for 3 generations into the future. That was sort of the original discussion with Abraham, that this will be a covenant with me and children, etc. Ramban, Nachmanides, the famous commentator, attempts to answer this problem, claiming that Avimelech was simply afraid that Isaac would not honor a covenant made by his father, seeing that Avimelech on his part had violated the agreement by expelling Isaac. So Ramban's, the summary of Ramban's interpretation is Avimelech came because now that Isaac had completely left the land of Gerar, the outermost boundaries of the Philistine territory, it would seem like Avimelech had kicked him out completely. And that might be construed as a violation of the agreement made with Abraham. And if Avimelech had violated the agreement made with Abraham, he would have to worry not only about the implicit curse that came from one who had violated a sworn oath, but also have to worry about the real world implications of Isaac turning around and violating it back towards him and his people in some form of militaristic or economic attack. So Ramban's opinion is Avimelech is showing up because he thinks he might have just accidentally, on purpose, broken the agreement and is afraid of the consequences, and so he wants to re-ratify it. However, as Or HaChaim says, I have not seen anywhere that part of the agreement between Abraham and Avimelech included the right of Abraham or his descendants to reside in the land of the Philistine. There was, therefore, no breach of the agreement when Avimelech asked Isaac to leave Gerar, and the problem we have raised remains unanswered. So, Or HaChaim rejects Ramban's interpretation because he says, look, when Avimelech and Abraham made the agreement to have a mutual non-hostility, they never said the other party is allowed to live in their territory. Yes, at the time there was an overlap in their space when Abraham had gone down into the Philistine land at that moment, but it was never stipulated that Abraham or his descendants would be able to take up long-term residence in that land, or that Avimelech or his successors would not be allowed to ask them to leave. That seems like it was never included in that. Now, we might have imagined it, but as any good lawyer will tell you, what you imagine the contract says is nothing compared to what the contract actually says. And since nowhere in the Torah does it say that Abraham was gaining the right to live in Avimelech's territory in perpetuity for him and his children, Avimelech should not feel that he broke the covenant when he asked Isaac to leave. Therefore, we are still left with trying to figure out, why is Avimelech showing up here in Beersheba to talk to Isaac? So Or Hayim begins his own explanation of solving this problem. We have learned that a vow can be annulled only in the presence of the other affected party. And this is similar to how Moses agreed to stay with Yitro as a vow not to return to the Pharaoh in Egypt. When God told Moses to return to Egypt, the Torah says, God said to Moses in Midian, go return to Egypt. There too, the words in Midian appear superfluous at first glance. But God told Moses that since he had made his vow in Midian, that was the place he had to annul it. All right, so this is essentially trying to draw a parallel to the from Gerar to the phrase in Midian, that we can understand the unnecessary phrase in Midian. That's where Moses was living. So of course, God said to Moses in Midian. Why does the Torah have to highlight that when that's just his location? I don't begin every sentence, when I'm talking with my family, saying, in Orlando, because we're in Orlando. It goes without saying. The fact that it was said then means it's telling us something. And what is it telling us? Well, as the Talmud is trying to tell us, is that you can't annul a vow that involves another person without being in the place of the other person, which makes a great deal of sense. If I make a vow to Frank that I will not touch any of the fruit off the tree, even when it hangs over to my property, for whatever reason we came to that agreement, I can't then say, you know what, that was a stupid vow. I'm going to have it annulled because the underlying principle was flawed and it was a misunderstanding. And there are ways to annul such vows. But if I'm going to do that, I cannot make such a vow. I cannot break such a vow. I'm sorry. Someone who knows better should not be calling me during class. Let me put it on Do Not Disturb because they may not get the message. Okay. Yes. So where was I? Yeah. So therefore, Moses was told to return to Egypt in Midian, meaning before you go, you have to tell your father-in-law, Yitro, that you need to be released from your vow about not returning to Egypt because you need to go back because God is sending you on this mission. So the in Midian is replying that God was instructing Moses that he needed to talk to Yitro before he had permission to go back. He couldn't just say, hey, God told me, and leave without talking to Yitro. There needed to be that understanding that the vow was being released. Now, the report in the Torah here, now talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Avimelech, shows clearly that Abraham departed from Gerar immediately and settled in Beersheba, back in the chapters with Abraham and Avimelech. Abraham did not accept Avimelech's gifts in order to remain in Gerar, but moved to Beersheba, where Isaac also lived after his expulsion from Gerar. So they're both following the same pattern, but Abraham left very early, very willingly, whereas we know Isaac stayed longer. I have found a statement recorded in Bereshit Rabbah, different midrash, where Avimelech refers to the kindness he showed Abraham and requests a kindness in return. The kindness was Avimelech's offer to Abraham to reside in the land of the Philistines, an offer which Abraham declined. The request to conclude a treaty was meant to be Abraham's quid pro quo for that offer. When the Torah quotes Avimelech as having performed an act of kindness towards Abraham, the Torah reports Avimelech's own version, not a historical fact. Right, let me see if I can untangle that, because even in the translation, it's a little confusing. So Avimelech did offer to allow Abraham to stay longer in Gerar, according to Bereshit Rabbah's reading of Genesis 21, but Abraham did not take him up on that offer. Instead, it describes Avimelech's perspective, his version of the events, that he had done a kindness for Abraham, not that the kindness actually existed, not that the kindness was actually accomplished. We can dither about whether or not offering a kindness is the same as actually fulfilling the kindness, but the Midrash here is taking it as no, that the offer was made, Abraham rejected the offer, and went to live in Beersheba. And therefore, there was no quid pro quo that happened there. There was no final agreement where Abraham accepted the gift of Avimelech of residing in that area of the Philistines. Now, Isaac, on the other hand, did remain in the land of the Philistines, prospering greatly during his sojourn there. When the Torah reports Avimelech as going to Isaac from Gerar, this means on account of the legal situation deriving from Isaac's stay in Gerar. So Isaac, as we saw at the beginning of our reading today, did not just leave the area of the Philistines. He stayed. He prospered, he grew so wealthy that they were jealous and created a tension between himself and the people of the area. And had to be forcibly asked, get out, by Avimelech, and then all of the quarrels over the wells, etc. So there is a difference. As much as the two episodes of Isaac and Abraham look similar, there are some substantial differences in how they were handled. And as such, there is a different legal situation due to Gerar, from Gerar, and that is what Avimelech is coming to discuss. So Avimelech has a different agenda in his conversation with Isaac because Isaac behaved differently than Abraham following the end of the initial round of who's your sister, which was at the beginning of the Torah reading. Abraham had not accepted Avimelech's offer at the time and could therefore annul his oath without the presence of Avimelech. Abraham said, look, I didn't actually take your offer, so I didn't actually make a reciprocal oath in accepting of your offer. And therefore, what I did offer in my oath of peace and friendship was not really contingent upon you. Since it wasn't contingent upon you, I am at liberty to cancel it without you. It's just like if I say to myself, I'm not going to eat any apples and make an oath about that, even though that oath will include my neighbor's apple tree, it's not actually about my neighbor, and it's not a quid pro quo oath between us over some issue that also includes the apples. And therefore, if I want to annul my vow about the apples, I don't have to tell my neighbor, even though it may affect his apple trees as well. So Abraham would not have needed that. The fact that Isaac did accept Avimelech's offer made it impossible for him to annul Abraham's covenant without the presence of Avimelech. Because Isaac did stay, because he was longer in Gerar, because the Gerar situation occurred, that meant that Avimelech and Isaac had to get together again in order to update the agreement, because they needed each other to be present if they were going to alter the terms of that oath. All right. Hopefully, I didn't lose too many people. I know that legalese can sometimes not be everybody's cup of tea, but if I can just do a quick application to personal life situations, rather than the power politics of mighty tribal leaders, this is giving us a very basic idea that if you are dealing with something and you need to make a decision about it that is focused on you, that's ultimately your decision. You don't need the input of others. No one else has the right of countermanding your decision for yourself. while it's certainly fine to ask for their advice and input, and usually it's a good idea, if it is a decision that involves you and only you, feel free to make it and feel free to change it when necessary for your own needs. But if it is a decision that involves others, if it has a direct impact on others, if it is an actual promise to others, then all the more so you are going to need them when any changes are going to be made. So if you promise somebody, I'm not going to accept that promotion because it would take me away from the family too much, and then you are tempted to take the promotion, that's fine. You are absolutely allowed to reconsider that position. But since you promised not to take that promotion because of your commitment to other people, you're going to need to go talk to the other people. And if you're going to actually break that decision, you're going to have to tell them that first. You don't just ignore them and do whatever you feel like because, hey, it's my promotion, my career, yada, yada, yada. If you involve them in the initial discussion, you have to involve them in any update of that situation. And that's hard. But then again, that's the whole point. The point of making vows and oaths and promises to other people is precisely so that other people will know they can trust us, that they can rely on our commitment to them for whatever it is that we stated, and that we would in a reciprocated fashion rely upon them and their word. It's about establishing that trust that even when I'm not present, what we agreed upon while we were present together will still be maintained, because we, can't be with each other 24/7. If you're going to need to update that, then you need to tell them. And if you don't, then you will absolutely destroy all of the trust that might have been built in that relationship. Because if you're willing to change the terms and conditions of our understanding, our agreement, a promise, a vow, or an oath, when I'm not there, then what's the point of having a vow, a promise, or an oath? Because there are going to be lots of times when I'm not there. And now I'm going to be worried that you're going to change it when I'm not there, and that you'll be doing it specifically when I'm not there because it makes life easier for you. The whole point of making promises is that you're making things harder for yourself in a way that will reassure someone else that they can count on you, that they can trust you. If you're not going to follow through with that, if you're not going to play by the rules, well, then don't be surprised when no one trusts you. So that's the very practical advice that the Or HaChaim through the Talmud, through the episode of Isaac and Abraham and Avimelech is trying to give us. Something which I dare say that without the guidance of our sages, most of us would not have come to as clearly as we do with their assistance. Okay, let's continue to clarify this a little bit more. And Ahuzat and Pichol, the two people that accompanied Avimelech. Or HaChaim continues, we need to know why Avimelech had to take these two people with him, something he had not done when he made a covenant with Abraham. They were not mentioned in the same way. Avimelech took along an entourage, Ahuzat and the others, in order to make the vow they wanted Isaac to undertake qualify as an oath made in public, and therefore not subject to annulment at any future time. We may view Avimelech as having made sure that sufficient people were present to take Isaac's vow, to make Isaac's vow irrevocable. So the inclusion of those names is not just to tell us he had an entourage. Like we said before, obviously he had an entourage, and it's not because those particular people were involved in some other way. It was to tell us, as Or HaChaim, that this was going to be an extremely public vow. By taking these high-ranking public officials and by taking a sufficient quantity of them, we can be sure now that this statement is not just a private agreement with a handshake, but is in fact a formal, in this case, diplomatic commitment. Likewise, again, for our personal lives, if you want to make a statement of commitment to another person, that statement will carry more weight in the trust the person has in you if you do it publicly. This is, of course, why weddings are done as a public event, because by bringing in more people, more people are going to know if you violate it that you are untrustworthy. And as most of us would not want our reputation to be tarnished in that way, the larger the group that is witness to our vow, the more likely we are to commit to actually fulfilling the vow, the promise, the agreement that we have made. And of course, that works on a smaller scale as well. If your boss wants to make a commitment to you, after this project, I want to promote you, or I want to give you this special benefit, or whatever it might be. We all know that a written statement is going to be stronger than an oral one, and an oral or written statement that is given publicly is going to be considered stronger than one that was done in private. So we still understand this intuitively, but we should also understand it explicitly. And we can see that explicit understanding here in the vignette of Avimelech and Isaac. And for our next section here, we're actually moving to Rabbeinu Bachya to reflect on the character of Isaac. Because as I was trying to point out as we were reading the text at the beginning, Isaac's behavior seems very hostile, very aggressive. As I mentioned before, it could just be in a very pashat way that Isaac is fed up, that he has reached his breaking point, that he has been backed into a corner, and he sees Avimelech and the others showing up here in Beersheba so far from their home as being tantamount to an invasion, and he is saying no further. I retreated in order to give you room and to try and make peace, and you come here now into this place where it is undeniable that you have no claim. And that is why Isaac speaks so aggressively. But there are other ways to understand it, and let's take a look at that. We have to understand why Isaac spoke to the king and his entourage in such a hostile manner. It seems incompatible with our image of Isaac. Besides, seeing that in the end he did make a covenant with them, what was the point of the hostile attitude Isaac displayed initially? Furthermore, once Isaac had told Avimelech and company that they hated him, why did he spell out how this hatred had expressed itself by his being expelled from Gerar? This is always helpful when commentators give us their questions that they are trying to answer. One, because it helps us contextualize the answer they're going to give us, but two, because it also can promote ourselves to look at the text more carefully, to see the kind of questions we can come up with when we look at Torah in this passage or any other passage, of always trying to ask why? Why like this? And then if this was going to happen, why did that happen? So why was he hostile? If he was going to make a covenant, why be hostile at all? And if he was going to mention why they hated him, why did he actually have to go into the details of you hated me and kicked me out? Just say you hated me, or just say you kicked me out. It seems, again, redundant. Okay, so let's try and break it into pieces. We must understand Isaac's word as reflecting his awareness that the only reason Avimelech displayed any interest in making an agreement with Isaac was his concern that possibly his own inheritance would be in jeopardy due to God's promise to Abraham of the whole land of Canaan. Okay, so how can we interpret Isaac's words as being appropriate and correct and not too aggressive or hostile? Well, if we look at it from Isaac's point of view, here comes Avimelech. And what's he doing here in Beersheba? Right? It can't be that Isaac is still making trouble for him in the Philistine area. What's going on here? Well, Avimelech must be realizing that with Isaac's continued ascendancy, that Avimelech is in trouble, right? He knows, as most of the people of the land did, that there was a promise between this Adonai God, this Yud-He Vav-He God to Abraham, that the entire territory would eventually belong to Abraham and his descendants. Well, a lot of people, I'm sure, ignored that or didn't really register it as being a serious promise because, who was this Yud-He Vav-He anyway, as Pharaoh would later on say very powerfully. But as Isaac continues to prosper, as he continues to strike it with wells, so to speak, Avimelech must be beginning to get an unsteady feeling. that indeed this is going to become Isaac's inheritance. The land will go to Isaac's children. And what does that mean for Avimelech and his family? Now, Abraham had already reassured Avimelech about those concerns, and Isaac, his son, would certainly not be able to annul a promise made by his father. So that part seems clear, right? Well, I mean, yeah, Avimelech might be concerned, but Abraham had already tried to assuage his worries with their own covenant, and nobody would have assumed that Isaac would even have the authority to overrule his father's covenant. So it's still a little hard to understand. There was therefore no reason for Avimelech to approach Isaac in this matter. Isaac reasoned, as Rambam rules, that vows that are taken with the consent of another party cannot be revoked except with the party's consent, as we talked about in Or HaChaim. Since Abraham had not done so during his lifetime, it was too late for Isaac to make any changes. Under the circumstances, Avimelech had no need of Isaac at all. So, if Avimelech was only concerned about his own standing in a Canaan that would eventually be taken over by Isaac's family, but he had a vow from Abraham that should be unassailable, that Isaac should not be able to change, and certainly which Isaac couldn't change without the consent of Avimelech, then there's really no reason for Avimelech to show up. Therefore, it wasn't a hostile invitation. When Isaac said, "Why did you come?" this is not to be understood as a hostile statement, but is pointing out that there was no need for them to come all the way in order to request what they were about to ask. So what Rabbeinu Bachya is saying is that if we look through this very, very logically, assuming essentially rational actors in all of the different stages, then since Avimelech had a vow from Abraham, and since such a vow would supersede Isaac's own wishes, because that's how treaties work, they are inherited to the next generation, and since even if there was an attempt to change the conditions, it couldn't happen without Avimelech's consent, Isaac is genuinely just perplexed, not aggressive, not feeling attacked, not, "Are you going to follow me here? Get out of my house, you have no power here." No, it's just Isaac saying, "Oh, I wasn't expecting to see you here, because the only thing I can imagine that you're coming to talk about is the covenant, and there's no reason to. It's set, and it couldn't be changed without me being present with you anyway, so I don't know why you're here." So, seeing that this was so, he could only assume that they had come for his sake, presumably in order to lure him back to Gerar. So, instead of thinking that they're coming here because they think the covenant's in jeopardy, Isaac knows that can't be the reason. So the only reason they might come, that he can imagine, would be for them to say, things were a lot better when Isaac was around here. I mean, all that bounty that he brought in for himself, well, that did kind of help all of us. Maybe we can get him to move back, and then we can all be sharing that blessing. And he alluded to this idea by using the word "to me." Isaac said, "Why did you come to me?" This was hard to believe, however, in view of the past hostility shown to him. He added the word "and you," referring to Avimelech and his ministers personally, and he meant that it was not just the population at large which had displayed hatred towards him. So Isaac is saying, "Why did you come to me," meaning for me, "because you hated me. And since you hated me, you should know, or you should have no reason to come to me." Right? You can't be coming about the covenant. We've already established that doesn't make sense. That means you're coming for me, but you can't be coming for me because you personally, you hated me. And then by using the word "sent me away," Isaac meant that their hatred of him was based on jealousy. It is a well-known fact that hatred may evaporate unless it was caused by jealousy, meaning someone can be upset with another person and the hatred can eventually fade. But when it's a hatred that comes out of jealousy, that is a much more durable form of hatred. Hatred based on jealousy will not abate until the cause, in this case Isaac, of the jealousy has disappeared. Isaac challenged Avimelech that their hatred of him would not disappear as it was based on jealousy. So, you're trying to invite me back, but you kicked me out because you hated me, and you hated me because of jealousy, which we know because that's why you sent me away. If you'd hated me for some other reason, sending me away wouldn't have been necessary. We could have found a different way to diffuse your hatred. But sending away is something that has to be done when jealousy is the root, because jealousy feeds on the presence of the person of whom we are jealous. So it all gets unpacked that was the reason for Isaac's genuine confusion at why they are here, of what they could possibly be hoping to accomplish when all of the options, you're coming to talk about the covenant, that doesn't make any sense, can't be annulled anyway, Abraham, yada, yada, we have to be together, yada, yada. And you couldn't be coming to offer me to come back because you sent me away, because that was the only solution to the hatred you were feeling. So we are left still scratching our head of what could actually be wanted, which we will try and get here in Rabbeinu Bachya, which I apologize that actually the last paragraph was still from Orcha Chaim. Now we're into Rabbeinu Bachya. So Rabbi Yishmael views the offer of a covenant as not related to the covenant concluded with Abraham, but as a new non-aggression pact between Yitzchak and Avimelech, not to cause each other damage in any way. They wanted this to be a secret agreement that the world was not to know about. It was embarrassing for Avimelech if the world at large would hear that he had come all the way to Yitzchak to make the latter swear not to harm in any way, and that he was so scared of Yitzchak's power. So Rabbeinu Bachya provides us with a very powerful interpretation that indeed Avimelech was coming to make a covenant, but it wasn't because of the faultiness of the Abraham covenant. It wasn't because it had been nullified. It was because now Isaac was rising in a way that would make him so powerful that there would be new ways that could cause damage. Specifically, Isaac could damage Avimelech's kingdom simply by getting the confederation of others to come together to either attack or to embargo or otherwise harm Avimelech's kingdom. And Avimelech was recognizing the power of Isaac in this way, and he wanted an agreement that was not the way Isaac was going to behave. Even if those were things that could have been accepted under the original agreement with Abraham, now we need a new set of principles that expand the non-aggression that we have. And coming all this way was partly because he was desperate for such an agreement, and partly also so that it could be done out of the way, because Avimelech was humiliated. He did not want the world to know that here this great king of the Philistine area was groveling before this wealthy shepherd, but still not exactly somebody on the same standing in the world stage. Now, concerning Yitzchak's second point about their hating him, Avimelech said that this was absolutely not the case, and that he had no cause to be hostile to them. In fact, he would be ungrateful if he did them any harm, seeing that they had not only allowed him to depart in peace, but had not prevented him from taking all his wealth with him. So the reading of the statement by Avimelech when they come to discuss this new covenant, this new non-aggression pact, makes it clear that they want Isaac to think that they had never truly hated him, that instead it was just working out for the best. And you know that we didn't really hate you, because if we had hated you, we would have sent you out with nothing. And as looking back across Jewish history, while I can't say that letting us go with what was rightfully ours is a sign of great love, it has certainly been the case throughout history that many of those that have hated us have expelled us from their countries and taken everything from us in the process. Most recently, of course, the expulsion of Jews from the majority of the Arab countries in the Middle East following 1948. Most of those expulsions were done where the Jews were not allowed to take much of their possessions with them. So, yes, that would certainly mean you hate us more. Is it exactly a sign of no animosity? Well, maybe Avimelech is stretching it, but certainly in this position, that's what he feels he needs. And as to the third point Yitzchak had made, that they had expelled him, he had not suffered by this, as God had made him equally successful elsewhere, so that the fortune he had made could not be attributed to the location Gerar, which they had recently denied him. So finishes off by saying, well, you may have been expelled, but really, that was just a way to show that your prosperity wasn't due to us and due to Gerar, but due to Adonai. If you had stayed with us, then everybody would have attributed your success to us. By kicking you out, by pushing you out of the nest, you were going to be able to show that your flourishing was entirely due to God's blessing rather than us. Now, that may sound a little bit of a stretch, but if we go back to Abraham's discussion with the king of Sodom after the Great War that Abraham fought in, he says that he will not keep anything other than the basic things that were used during the rescue mission, because he doesn't want people to say that it was the king of Sodom, that had made him rich. So, yes, it's not entirely unreasonable for Isaac to rightfully concern himself with whether people will say it was Abimelech that made Isaac rich, it was the Philistines that made Isaac rich, when it should be because of Abraham and because of God that Isaac was rich. So yes, there definitely seems to be an element of truth to this. Now, this different way of looking at the situation that is being presented here in Rabbeinu Bachya is of course very interesting, because it reminds us that sometimes we do need to look at things from a different point of view. It might be tempting to see our entire discussion here as Avimelech as the bad guy, but not necessarily everything he's done has been terrible or bad, or worked out terribly for us. There are elements here that seem to be working in Isaac's favor, even if they weren't done in the proper way. But of course, all of this could have been avoided. All of the back and forth, the hurt feelings, the feeling of being expelled, and the jealousy that came from the Philistines. If all of that could have been avoided if they just actually talked. Going back to our initial discussion about vows only being made in the presence of people who are involved, and only abrogated in the presence of people involved, we can extend that in general, that if you want to avoid hatred, animosity, and violence, there has to be constant conversation, both grievances as well as feelings of having done generosity to someone else. These things cannot be assumed, they cannot be implied, they need to be explicit, especially if there is a record of tension. All the more so, they have to be explicit in order that they cannot be misunderstood. But even when there hasn't been a record of tension, for example, in a family that has not had such problems, nonetheless, they still need to be explicit in order to avoid openings for misunderstanding and misinterpretation and unnecessary tension, and then unnecessary conflict. It's not easy, and I know that for some of the viewers, this may not have been the most exciting of texts to wrestle with, just a little bit of negotiating and interpretation, but sometimes that is entirely what we need. And sometimes as we race through life, we think we understand not only ourselves, but what the other person or other group are thinking, and we don't stop to ask, what have I told them about what I'm thinking? What have they told me? What would I like them to tell me? What would I like for them to know about me? And let me make that clear, and let me ask them the questions that will get them to answer clearly. There may actually be some improvement in the situation if such efforts are undertaken. With that, and not seeing any questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up, and I will see everybody next time. Take care.